Hello and welcome to Mississippi Insight. I'm Byron Brown. Thank you for joining us. This week we are focused on gun violence in Jackson and beyond and the massive costs inflicted at the community level. Here in the capital city, we mark the 23rd homicide of the year this week. One man was shot twice and died Monday morning along Nob Hill Drive. Police have arrested one man and charged him in that case. Another man turned himself in for a homicide over the weekend on Jane Avenue near Ellis Avenue. JPD says that Trayvon Bailey was shot while sitting inside of a Nissan Altima at a gas station. He died at the scene. These are just the latest in a string of deadly shootings that have only increased over the last 12 months. One Jacksonian commented to our reporters at the scene of yet another shooting, this one off Northwest Street last month.
It ain't the police fault. I mean, I see police all the time doing the best job they can. It ain't enough of them. It ain't enough money to pay them all. But we got to stop killing each other. Forget the police, forget the firemen, forget the mayor. We got to stop killing each other as black men. Ain't gonna be none of us left.
Well, these are not simply random killings. Taken together, they represent a rising level of violence that we are seeing statewide. And we all share in the cost of that violence. The nonprofit violence prevention group Everytown for Gun Safety released a comprehensive report last month on the cost of gun violence nationwide. They ranked Mississippi in second place after Louisiana for the highest total cost of gun violence per person. Everytown puts that cost at more than $1,700 a person, totaling over $5 billion. Gun violence across the state has risen 51% since 2010. That compares with a 17% increase nationwide. Everytown says in an average year, 640 people die and more than 2,000 others are wounded by guns in Mississippi. And this is not simply a matter of gun homicides. Just 47% of shooting deaths by intent were homicides. 46% were suicides. The report covers immediate costs that start at the scene of a shooting, including long-term physical and mental health care costs, lost earnings, and criminal justice costs. The report also finds that states with strong gun safety laws have a much lower cost for such violence than states with lax laws, such as Mississippi. Our guest this week has some thoughts on this critical topic. Pastor Lorenzo Neal is a survivor of gun violence himself. It has cost his family dearly. Dr. Neal is a volunteer with Everytown. I spoke with him by Zoom Thursday.
You can't deal with gun violence without addressing the fiscal aspect of it, from the initial encounter after a gun incident to the trauma family experience. And nationally, Mississippi is second in this spot, right under my home state, Louisiana. Louisiana's first, Mississippi is second. And it's roughly $1,700 per victim, totaling about $5 million, a little over $5 million a year, that is the fiscal impact of gun violence.
Let's talk a little bit about your personal perspective on the cost of gun violence, one that you've been paying since childhood, in fact.
Yeah, so I am a survivor of gun violence. I'm a senior survivor fellow with the Everytown for Gun Safety Survivor Network. And I've been personally impacted by gun violence because in 1980, I lost my 25-year-old mother, Sharon, to an act of domestic violence that involved a gun. She was 25, I was only 5 years old, and she left behind myself and 3 other my siblings. And in 2016, I lost my 18-year-old nephew, Kevin Neal Jr., to an act of gun violence. I've also lost a student, 14-year-old student gun violence, and more recently, a 27-year-old member of my congregation to gun violence.
And on all this is what prompted you to get involved in the gun safety movement?
Yes, that, and primarily after the shooting at Emmanuel AME Church, Mother Emmanuel in Charleston, where I lost a colleague, as well as 8 of his parishioners. That prompted myself, and along with the AME Connectional Church, to get involved.
And so what are you trying to do to make an impact?
My role is, one, raising the stories of survivors and helping to see the people behind the statistic, sharing stories like myself and many other survivors of gun violence, sharing their stories to help people see that this epidemic is not just constricted to what we are seeing on television regarding mass shootings or anything of that nature, but it's across the board. It's impacting people across the board.
We'll hear from the mayor of Jackson later in the show about some of his moves to curb violence in the city. But these moves include curfews with minors and efforts to add more police officers to the police department. But what else needs to be done at the local level to change some of the outcomes here that we're seeing?
Well, there are a number of things that have to be done. I think one of the biggest issues that we're seeing, not only with the exacerbation COVID-19 and the impact that this had on it, increasing gun violence, but the fact that there are a lot of people, especially young Black men, who have this sense of dread, anxiety, angst, and they sense there's lack of opportunity and a number of things that contribute to that. So those are the issues that we can address directly as community leaders, activists, pastors, educators. Those are things that we can address directly. The other thing is we need to get legislators to be more less restrictive and try to be pass more common sense gun legislation. I know we want to try to be as proactive as we can after incidents like mass shootings and things of that nature. And right now, the federal government has taken some major steps legislatively for gun violence prevention with more universal background checks and things of that nature. That may solve one part of the problem, but it's a human problem that we really have to address. And that's a tougher challenge, if you like to put it that way.
Yeah, I mean, those on the other side who are pro Second Amendment, who will say that it's not whether you take guns off the street or not, those who want access to guns are going to get the guns one way or another.
It's kind of crazy. I am a gun violence prevention advocate, but I'm also a gun owner. So I don't want my gun taken away. I advocate for responsible gun ownership. I advocate for safe, legal guns, all of that. But here, the trick to that is, yes, there's a sense that those who want access to guns or will get access, but the problem is the ones who are getting access should not be getting access to it. There's no reason a 13 or 14 or 17-year-old kid should have access to a weapon, even if it's in their, if they're in a home where there is a weapon. Those weapons should be secure, and the parents should model responsible gun ownership. So those children should have access to it. But we see far too frequently children succumbing to accidental shootings and things of that nature because they have access to weapons.
We'll have more with Dr. Lorenzo Neal after a quick break. And 12 News investigates the gun show industry. It's Mississippi Insight on WJTV.
Here in Jackson, the police will always say that a lot of the gun violence that we're seeing here is that the police chief will say that it's people are handling their disputes by pulling out a gun and shooting each other. These aren't random shootings. Oftentimes it's someone who knows their target and they get in an argument and they pull out a gun and that's how they end the dispute. How do you handle that situation where police say we can't be there if someone gets in an argument with somebody and pulls out a gun inside a home or shoots at a car after they've had an argument?
And that's where the interpersonal engagement comes in. As a pastor, one of the roles we should be doing is, engaging the lives of those we lead, not just, preaching on Sunday, but actually inquiring of the souls of the individual. And that's a lost strain of the Black church worship experience. It's not about being dozy, but it's about being intimately acquainted with those who you lead. And it goes back to the community. Again, once we once we are able to reconnect as a community, and with not just with community leaders, but as families, and families feel safe enough to address the issues within their families, and people feel safe enough to say something when they see something, then we can be more proactive when it comes to gun violence prevention.
Is it a breakdown of the family? Is that what we're losing here, or what are you seeing that's going on within the community?
Well, yes, that is definitely a contributor to it. It is not the major contributor to it. It's more a symptom of a greater issue. And I know some of my conservative brothers and sisters would argue that that is the main issue, but we know statistically it doesn't matter if you come from a 2-parent home or a single parent home. There's still likelihood that you could be impacted by gun violence.
At the state level, are there any measures being considered that by the legislature that you are keeping a close eye on right now?
Yeah, there's SB 2107 that's being considered that would allow private parties to sue the state if something happened. And that, of course, is one of the fiscal issues of gun violence. There's also a part of that bill that would prevent state agencies from adopting rules and regulations to restrict firearms in just about any way, which means that state agencies would not be allowed to prohibit firearms in any of their facilities, or they would not be able to restrict employees from carrying firearms within a facility. So it's those, I don't know how far that will get. I think we're a little bit more sensible as a state, but though that's just something that could come out and really impact the state.
And what do you think the chances of that passing or getting any kind of traction in a very conservative state?
I'm uncertain, to be honest with you. I think the only way it would really get a lot of traction is if there's not a lot of attention brought to it. As in 2016 with the Church Protection Act, there was not a lot of attention brought to it until right before it was, being introduced and after it had been introduced. So one of the things is bringing attention to it, to if it even gets in committee or makes it out of committee or makes it to the floor of both houses. We just have to make sure that the public is informed about it, and they're able to engage the legislators so that the legislators can make a common sense decision.
Do you have any guidance or advice for people watching now who would like to support the anti-violence campaign?
Yes, the main thing is recognize that gun violence impacts every individual in the state of Mississippi, fiscally, emotionally, and communally. It affects us. We are all impacted by it. And so we must do all we can to advocate to our legislators for responsible, common sense gun legislation. We also, if we are gun owners, like most Mississippians may be, we must model responsible gun ownership to our families. And when it comes to the community, we must invest more in sharing and getting together to prohibit, especially young Black men, to prohibit these incidents of angst, anger, anxiety, depression, all of that is amalgamated into gun violence. So it's something we all can do. And if persons who identify as victims or survivors of gun violence, we offer through the Everytown Gun Safety Survivor Network, we offer support for grief. We offer support for survivors to help them share the stories of themselves or their loved ones. And I would definitely love to connect with them, with any individual, and help them in that manner.
Do you feel hopeful that we can get a handle on the violence and what's going on in the community?
Absolutely. Absolutely. We have the means, we have people, and being a person of faith, we have the God, we have the Lord who is able to enable us to liberate. We're supposed to be about empowerment and liberation. And that's what our faith tradition teaches us in the Black religious faith tradition. And that's what we should lean on. And yeah, I'm very hopeful.
Pastor Lorenzo Neal, thank you for talking to us.
Thank you.
All right.
Welcome back. We spoke with Jackson Mayor Chokwe Antar Lumumba last week about the ongoing water crisis, even now when thousands of people lack running water. The topic of violent crime remains at the forefront. And one tack this mayor has taken is to implement curfews for minors. We talked about that last week. You've extended the city curfew for minors in the city. What made you decide to extend it, and why have you not just said, well, we're going to have a month-long curfew instead of going week to week?
Because we do so based on observing the data and the information, having discussions with our police department leadership, understanding the impact that it has had, and when there might be still and more information that we need to secure, then we look at that. That's the same way in which I've dealt with many of the executive orders that we've issued throughout this pandemic, looking at it. Some are extended a little further, but we review them at that time and see if the need is still there. What are we seeing in terms of how the corresponding information or the corresponding data is resulting, or what has the result been based on the decisions that we have made? And so that's why we look at it that way.
The city has started out pretty tough when it comes to murders in the city at the beginning of the year. How do you get a handle on that?
Well, I think that we have to understand that it takes a comprehensive approach. I think that we have to understand the role and the importance of police and their job in responding to crime. But I think we also have to have a greater sense of what are the contributing factors that lead to crime. What are the contributing factors in terms of the fact that when we're talking about youth, and this leads into that decision, that they're not in the institutions and the position in which they thrive. Not being in school, not having some of the social outlets that they would normally have. It's a lot easier telling a young person what to do than simply telling them what not to do. When we know that mental health has demonstrated an ability or the issues of mental health have been exacerbated at this time. When we know the issues of poverty have been exacerbated at this time. Those are all contributing factors to the result of crime. Crime isn't unique to Jackson, but wherever you find high poverty, you typically find high crime. And so we need to be able to interrupt the cycle and interrupt those circumstances that are bleeding into the violence that we're seeing in our community. There are special initiatives, special task force that our police are trying to do, but we have to understand that it really requires all of us. I'm thankful for the institutions that have reached out. I'm grateful for the churches that have asked to be supportive. I'm grateful for the social service agencies that have now decided that they would lean in and work with the city of Jackson to figure out how we find solutions to this collectively. I believe in the words of Ella Baker. She said, she said that when you look deep into community, you find strength, not weakness. And I believe that the community has to be viewed as a resource that knows many of these conflicts that are ensuing and what's taking place, and help us in the process of resolving.
Last November, we asked the Jackson police chief where he believes criminals are getting access to guns. He didn't know exactly where guns are coming from, but he did say complaints were coming from people blaming gun shows and the areas surrounding those events. Jade Bulecza takes a closer look in this 12 News investigation.
To Bill Griffith of Cleveland, Mississippi, everyone needs a gun.
Without our Second Amendment, government would eventually control. You would have no protection.
Chaz Shepard lives in Jackson. He too uses guns not only for protection but survival.
It's a .357 caliber gun. made by Glock, and I bought me a 60-round magazine for my AR pistol. I have the sound thrower on there, which reduces the sound. I have the automatic sights, and I have a 2x tactical zoom.
He says if city leaders think criminals are at gun shows, then they should monitor the shows. The man in charge of the gun show says city leaders are welcome at the show.
We've been doing shows here for 36 years now, and I've been hearing for many, many years about the police arresting somebody, and then later that night they're already out. They made bail, they've just been released, the prosecutors aren't going after them. So if they commit a crime, they're right back out on the streets. So what's the incentive to not commit a crime? There's really none in this area. And I think instead of blaming gun shows, they need to blame the criminals.
Bean says criminals will be criminals, and as far as gun shows go, there is no gun show loophole or private seller exemption. While Bean wouldn't support a universal background check, he would support the option to call the FBI.
But I would support the option to do that, because say I were to sell to a neighbor, I know that person, I know they're following the law, they're above board. I'm not going to sell to somebody that I don't trust. But if there was someone that I was concerned about, I would like to have the option to be able to call into the background check system.
He says at the gun shows there are only a couple people selling privately.
But they're going to keep good records because they don't want anything coming back on them. So they keep records of who they sell it to, the customer's license, they get a copy of that. So if anything were to happen, they would have proof of sale, and they don't sell to anybody that they get a bad vibe off of.
Gun issues back into the focus after a record 2020 for homicides and now more than 20 murders in the capital city this year due to gun violence.
Our thanks to Jade for that report, and we'll be right back. Big thanks to Pastor Lorenzo Neal for Everytown for gun safety, and 12 News' investigator Jade Bulecza for their contributions this week. We'll be back next weekend with more of the political and current affairs coverage that you demand. I'm Byron Brown. From all of us here at 12 News, make it a good weekend.